Welcome to today's Future View at the Good Intelligence Biometric Summit 2021. My name is Alan Goode and I'm the CEO and Chief Analyst of Good Intelligence, and I will be your host today. I would like to welcome Francis Zelazny, who will present on Beyond Blockchain, New Frameworks for Biometric Security and Identity Management. Francis is a seasoned marketing strategist and business development professional with over 25 years of experience with startup and scale-up companies, primarily focused on biometrics and digital identity, fintech, data and analytics, and cybersecurity. Francis has led marketing and strategy teams at L1 Identity Systems, MyCheck, BioCatch, and most recently, Signals Analytics, and has run her own business consultancy, where she provided expertise in biometrics and identification systems to growth companies. She's currently leading a new venture called Anonybit, which provides a groundbreaking infrastructure for decentralizing biometric technology. Hint, it's not on the blockchain. Thank you, Francis.
Thank you so much, Alan, for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity. I'm going to share my screen now. And hopefully this is working. Okay. So thank you again, Alan, for having me. Really appreciate the opportunity. It's always a pleasure to speak with the biometrics industry, and especially in tackling some new frontiers. So today I'm here to talk about Beyond Blockchain and new frameworks for biometric security and identity management, thinking about all of the different trends and forces that are facing our industry today, introducing a new paradigm for how we should think about biometric storage, data protection issues, and ultimately protecting our own personal identities. So I don't need to tell the group this. The problem of storing and using sensitive personal data is getting more and more acute. In my mind, I think these three forces are becoming a real emergency, an emergency in how we rethink the way we manage data, the responsibility that we as individuals and enterprises have towards storing and managing personal data, and the consequences of not doing so with the utmost integrity. And obviously, these are the three trends that are coming together: the regulatory requirements, GDPR, CPRA, and so on and so forth, the continued data breaches, and more consumer desire for control over the use of personal data. But this might seem a little bit theoretical, but at the same time, we're having conversations at the moment around vaccine passports and more and new applications that have to do with the storage and protection of personal data that is having enormous implications for how we as individuals manage our daily lives and how institutions can trust what is happening in the digital environment. And none of this is theoretical. From a biometric perspective, many of the participants here have probably lived through some of these headlines and are still suffering through the implications of these headlines, where fingerprints and biometric data is stolen and is out there, and this is just becoming more and more acute. In the US, recently there have been DMV breaches, and the more we create ID systems that are new, again, like the vaccine passports, the more these central honeypots are out there for hackers and fraudsters to steal. And this comes from the fact that we, as an industry, are stuck in old paradigms. Either we have biometric data that is stored in centralized databases that have to be protected, or we rely on the biometrics that are on the device, which are not bound to a particular identity and can easily be circumvented by fraudsters that call the bank, for example, and tell them they got a new phone number. And so all of the, what seems like control is not really secure at all. And so when you look at the choices that we're making, they really are constant trade-offs between device-dependent privacy and storing biometrics, again, on the cloud. Biometric applications that are bound to rooted identity and others that are not. Using biometrics as a fallback, or using passcodes as a fallback, and how do you make all of these things happen? The interoperability of the systems that we're talking about is ultimately key to making sure that the problem authentication is resolved across the board. And this is, part of the main challenge that we have today. When we think about authentication and we think about interoperability and how things are being done today, we have to, I think, take a step back and think about, okay, how do you authenticate somebody's identity in a meaningful way if it's not really tied to upstream and downstream applications? And ultimately it becomes this, this big circle. In my L1 days, we would call it the circle of identity, but there's no reason we can't apply this to the digital world, where the KYC process is bound to the authenticator, where the authenticator is bound to other non-biometric assets that might need to be stored and retrieved, and then the use of all of this in further applications. So a lot of people like to say the password is dead. I say that it will still take some time. And so we need to come up with frameworks that support both the reality on the ground and where we as an industry want to go. You might have a situation where the password is stored in a very secure manner, where only the person's biometric is used to retrieve that password, as an example. Cryptocurrencies, keys, and other secrets, all of these have to be protected with biometrics in order to ultimately secure the entire ecosystem all around. And this is what I mean by implementing authentication with the entire digital identity ecosystem in mind. So what I'm proposing today is a new framework, a framework that doesn't center around centralized databases that have to be protected, or device-based biometrics that could be circumvented. I'm proposing a framework that focuses on zero-knowledge authentication, where in fact there is no biometric template, and getting to the root of the problem with, how do you actually authenticate people if you don't have that template? So this is what I'm proposing today, a new framework for how biometric data is secured and managed. And this has to be beyond blockchain, because we all know the weaknesses of biometrics on the blockchain. And this framework should be based on four main principles. One, it should be device independent. It should work across devices. It should not be susceptible to or dependent on a particular device, and certainly not dependent on a PIN or a passcode as a fallback mechanism. The second principle is decentralized storage and matching. How do you leverage PII without maintaining it? This is both for the privacy of the consumer and the security of their data that is stored by enterprises. Number three, that personal data should not be held by any single entity. So there is no third-party ownership. And number four, that it could support multiple use cases. So supporting the KYC, credential management, authentication, password retrieval, storage of private keys and other secrets, and ultimately downstream applications. But we're seeing with solutions today, self-sovereign identity solutions, blockchain, FIDO, so on and so forth, they tend to address only specific use case in the ecosystem, but none of them actually carry through across. And I think that a framework that goes beyond blockchain and that can live and support the entire ecosystem will be a framework that ultimately will win. So with that, I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Francis. And I think it was a fascinating presentation. And you know, a lot of the work that we do in this area, you know, the connectivity between biometrics, identity, and authentication, kind of concurs with what you've been saying. And I must admit, it's an absolutely fascinating time to be involved in this industry. It's such a dynamic industry at the moment. So getting back to the you know, your ideas about, you know, having a new framework. So why do we need a new framework at the moment?
So I think that what we've seen on the one hand, the existing approach of storing biometrics in central honeypots are putting all of us at risk. This is, as I mentioned, this is not a theoretical or hypothetical conversation. I think everybody participating today, you, myself, you know, we all know people who've been affected by these breaches, and they're still suffering, and they're still questioning, you know, who exactly is going around with their identity. And when it comes to biometrics, the very thing that's attractive about biometrics is what makes it so scary if they're actually stolen. And so, you know, the time has really come to think about how we protect them in a different way. And ultimately, the blockchain is, you know, perhaps good for storing credentials or for storing information, but it doesn't support the authentication of the person in real time that is actually needed to secure a specific application or transaction.
Yeah, good point. So, you know, you've mentioned, you know, blockchain, you've mentioned, you know, FIDO as a method of decentralized authentication and self-sovereign identity. And SAML and federated identity. So there's a lot of good work that's been done, a lot of good work that's been, you know, done in creating these standards and trying to knit them together so they kind of interoperate. So how does this tie in? How does this new framework tie in with all the good work that's been done thus far?
So I think all of it has to come together. I think that analyzing every component separately could actually lead to this new framework, because everyone has its own place, but none of them on their own address the entire ecosystem. So if we think about self-sovereign identity and putting the credential in control of the user, you know, that's very powerful. But what happens when that key cannot be retrieved? What happens when you actually take that credential across different jurisdictions or different use cases or enterprises? How do you actually authenticate myself against that particular credential? Where's the biometric element? How do you make sure that somebody is not stealing, you know, that credential? And the biggest weakness is the device, because these credentials are, you know, attached to the device.
Sure.
And the same thing with FIDO. I mean, FIDO, tons of great work has been done for FIDO, but at the end of the day, it's as good as, you know, trusting that the person behind the device is really them. If you're only accepting a yes, no, and somebody gets in your phone, that's the #1 attack vector today. In fact, 100% of fraud happens in authenticated sessions. And this is how it's done, by circumventing, you know, these controls.
Okay. So is this a case of orchestrating what exists now, or creating, gluing all of these different kind of, you know, frameworks and identity solutions and authentication kind of standards together? Or are we talking about a complete, you know, green site, a new way of identifying, authenticating, and authorizing, you know, transactions, etc.?
I think it's creating a framework that can enable all of these existing standards and existing use cases, because that's ultimately what's missing. They're all good for the particular use case that they were designed for, but they don't necessarily, you know, none of them actually address the weakness of the other because they were all in the different silos. But if you can have an interoperable backend framework that secures biometrics and secures identity in a way that services and enables these different applications, you actually strengthen the entire ecosystem.
Okay. So you mentioned about perhaps some issues surrounding kind of blockchain-based identity. So what problems do you perceive or do you see existing with kind of blockchain-based identity systems at the moment?
So I think that the two main issues is the use case that doesn't support real-time authentication of the biometric record. So it's very useful for the self-sovereign use case in storing the credential. But when we talk about actual authentication, biometric matching, that's not being done on the blockchain for the precise reason that in order to match a biometric template, in general, the template has to be in holistic form, and storing that template in a decentralized way on the blockchain simply doesn't work. So that's why most of the applications of identity on the blockchain have to do with credentials as opposed to the biometric matching. So that's number one. And then number two, on the credential itself is the actual private key. So if somebody gets a new device, so the private key must be retrieved, that becomes the Achilles heel. So when we talk about backend frameworks, I'm talking about software-based frameworks for decentralizing the storage and the matching of biometrics, but also the decentralization and storage of other secrets like these private keys, so that they complement the block IDs or the self-sovereign frameworks, but provide this overall backup, which is sorely missing today.
Sure. So we've talked a lot about some of the issues that exist surrounding identity and biometric authentication at the moment. So can you tell me a little bit more about the way forward, your proposed solution?
So what we built at Anonybit is a decentralized infrastructure for storing and matching biometric data. It actually supports non-biometric data as well. What we're doing is, instead of storing features and measurements between features in order to create the biometric template, we're taking the biometric and we're splitting it into what's called anonymized bits. That's why the name of the company is Anonybit. And these anonymized bits are stored throughout a system of nodes, where they're dedicated nodes for different functions, for storage, for computation, and for mapping. And as a result, we're able to handle, like I said, both the storage and the matching in a decentralized way and provide support for non-biometric data as well. And the way we're supporting and we're enabling the ecosystem is by allowing any algorithm to work on our infrastructure. So any solution provider, biometric solution provider, can now go to market with a decentralized offering. And more interestingly, we are binding the KYC biometric into the infrastructure for downstream secure authentication. So this is how we're closing the loop. And so by supporting any biometric algorithm and supporting any biometric or non-biometric type of data, we're able to really support the needs of the entire digital ecosystem, as I mentioned before.
Okay, no, thank you very much. So if any of our audience wants to get in contact with you and find out more about Anonybit and your solution, what's the best way to do that?
The shortest cut is shortcut is Francis at Anonybit, ANONYBIT.io. You can also visit our website, of course, www.anonybit.io, and you'll see many different concepts and use cases for decentralized biometrics and identity management.
That's brilliant. Thank you. Thank you for your time today, Francis.
Thank you
enjoy
so
the rest
much,
of your day.
Alan, for having me.
All right.
Appreciate it.
Thanks. All the best.
Take care. Bye-bye.